Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be at the mighty OGO. Make sure we get that on the record for Hansard. Mr. Jakes and your team, thank you for showing up. Appreciate your work. I would say, with it being well over a year since we've had a budget, it's nice to have some picture as parliamentarians for, as you say, setting the table for what's to come. I hope I want to make sure I understand some of the assumptions that you've made, just so that I understand your very sobering testimony, and I thank you for, mentioning kind of how serious of a moment we're in fiscally. If I look at Appendix A in your detailed economic outlook, you're not forecasting a recession, is that correct? Like you have unemployment, it's up in 2025, but it's back down afterwards in 26 onwards, and you have real GDP growth. It's small, but it's positive 1.2, 1.3 ongoing. So you're not projecting a recession, is that correct?
No,
okay.
We're not projecting a recession, just very moderate growth.
So our current debt service costs, or even just the amount of debt we're taking on each year, is increasing at an alarming rate without any economic recession or headwinds. Not to say we don't have economic challenges, but my point is your assumptions are that the economy actually is growing from here on out, that unemployment is falling, and we're still seeing some fairly serious increases in annual debt service costs, and substantially, as my colleague has just pointed out, up to about $80 billion a year. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right. So, and I'm not challenging your assumptions, but obviously there are other pathways the economy can take. Some people are saying, well, unemployment actually may continue to increase. Growth might actually be a lot slower than we project. If unemployment goes up further or growth is not as high as you project, what will happen to the deficit and then the subsequent debt service costs?
If the economic path is worse than projected or worse than we anticipate, then the deficit figures will deteriorate.
Right.
I would, and something I think I mentioned to the committee last week, I would say on our end we're feeling pretty good about where things stand in the short term. So where we are now and going out over the next 12 to 18 months. The big question, and it's a policy question, which isn't in our bailiwick, but certainly is in the bailiwick of parliamentarians, is where do we end up in years 3, 4, and 5? Given the rupture that the Prime Minister has referred to, given the Prime Minister's reference to, quote, there's no going back, how do we get to those areas of growth? What are the policies that are going to be in place to ensure that the Canadian economy can return to its full potential growth?
Right. Yeah. I guess what I'm highlighting, or what I'm glad you're kind of confirming, is we might not be in the worst economic environment yet. And what we're seeing actually with the levels of spending is we're increasing the risk to the fiscal framework of the country before we're in potentially much more serious economic challenges. Like if we're going to spend almost 14 cents of every dollar on interest on the debt without a recession in the next couple of years, what could that be if there is a recession? Could be 15, could be 18, could be, any number. Would you view that as a risk to the framework?
I would view it as, and going back to quote, no one ever got laughed out of the room by quoting the Governor of the Bank of Canada. It's positive growth, but it's not going to feel good for most Canadians across the country. And in a situation, it definitely gives one pause where the economic numbers are positive and the fiscal numbers are negative and substantially negative.
And we're borrowing record amounts of debt in the markets today,
Yeah.
correct?
That's our time. I'm
Pardon
sorry.
Pardon me, Chair. Thank you for your indulgence.
Mr. Kasper.
Chair, I'll come back to the committee's last meeting, at which we talked about uncertainty, lack of transparency. It was the beginnings of a concern about rating agencies. I talked about the IMF and its 3 rules. So it's going to be, what do you think it's going to be like in 10 years? Should we be concerned? And how is the government managing its budgetary policy message? I think the answer to that question is already there in your own words. It's transparency. We advocate for more transparency. That's what we want to see, more transparency about the budget, about the financial plan, about the government's economic plan. That's the first stage, or the first step, I should say, in reducing uncertainty. For the rating agencies and for all Canadians. There's always some difficulty when there are shocking news, but when news are shocking, having a plan is one way of assuaging concerns. Thank you. In a democracy, which is what we are, there are a number of pillars. The first is transparency, as we've just said. One concern of mine is that the government is debating Canadian public policy on the basis of U.S. policy and is basically leaving aside sound management because the end justifies the means. What's your view on that? Because I'm very concerned about it. I think that is a valid point. And I hope people working in the Department of Finance are working hard to ensure that with the coming changes, everyone who might be affected by these major changes will be supported